I'm here with Dave Schweiger, Chief Product Development Officer at Odaptix, and going to talk about our leadership analysis. And today, and Dave, I've been through a number of leadership development programs where they shipped us off to, wild and wacky parts of the world for a week or 2 weeks. And in all those experiences I've had, which have been quite illuminating, mostly the analysis that we've taken were, a 360 review of people around me, my manager, the people report to me, and a couple peers. And in those cases, I could always tell who was talking to me, right? And then we do a Berkman or a Myers-Briggs or a core analysis, and always a red, action-oriented, results-oriented, get the job done, which was useful at times. But at Odaptix, we've taken a different approach. We look at the leadership team or the referent team. So why don't you tell me why we chose to do that and some of the benefits versus the traditional things that I've been through in my career.
Yeah, well, thanks, Bill. I appreciate that. Thank you for the introduction. Couple of things. Let's talk about first what we're measuring and why. And then let's talk about that referent group and why we've chosen that. So first of all, you've discussed a couple of things. One is that you've taken a lot of measures that have focused on your style or your traits, trying to get at the inner workings of your mind and how you think. And that's great, because I think those instruments serve a valuable purpose. They get the individuals to kind of reflect on themselves. There are things we're aware of about ourselves, and then there are some things that, we don't really know about ourselves. They try and uncover that stuff to make it more conscious. And that's great, because I think it's important in people's self-development. What those don't do, however, is give you any insight about how people see the way you behave. So those instruments may tell you clues to your thinking, and there's a link between how you think and how you behave in your own mind. And when we go through the leadership development programs and we take these, hopefully the ideas, if I get more insights, I can think about how I behave and maybe change ways to make it better for employees. But you still don't know how the employees see you. So even though I've gone through some of these tests with you and I think I've changed my behavior, it may not be picked up by the organization and the people who work around you, or if you're a senior leader, deep into the organization. Why is that important? In my mind, and from what I've observed from many years of doing this, is that how people see your behavior is what they're going to react to. And in leadership, your objective behavior that you think you're engaged in, you may think that that's important, but what people perceive is their reality. So it's good for us to give leaders feedback from the organization with regard to how the organization sees, how the organization reacts. So that's just one key point in this whole discussion. The second part here is why we focus on the leadership team. There's a couple of reasons. One is that people very rarely in an organization, especially if we're dealing with higher level leaders, even upper middle managers, there are multiple people that they interact with from the leadership team. So they're not always exposed to an individual, but they are exposed to a team of individuals. And they're oftentimes reacting to that team rather than reacting to one specific individual. So that's one reason for the team. The second, and I've confronted this a few times, is that individual leaders, when you give them open feedback, might not take it well. I'm dealing with a case right now with this where they get a negative feedback. They don't particularly like it, and they particularly don't want to deal with it. When you get the data from a group of leaders, it gives the leadership team something to gnaw on without identifying a particular individual. It's good that we just bring out an issue that affects the leadership team, because again, that's what people are reacting to. So it not only gives people a little bit of anonymity, it gives the individual leaders some coverage. Now, you can take that data from the team, and internally you can work it however you want. In other words, now the trait issues become important, the style issues become important, and we can take that on as a leadership team on how we as a leadership team present ourselves to the organization, rather than how Joe or Sarah or Juan presents themselves, because it's unrealistic. So if we're not changing the behavior of the leadership team as a whole, people are going to then still get, someone behaving one way toward them and another person behaving yet another way toward them. Hopefully this makes some sense, Bill, in what I'm saying.
Yeah, let me follow up with a question. So we have a leadership team. They have a known behavioral issue or weakness. The conversation they have with each other, the conversation they have with their leadership coach, what does that look like?
Well, therein lies the issue for the leadership coach to work with that team to decide how they as a group want to approach it. For example, should they have individual one-on-one coaching? Should they, as a group, do more team development work to explore their different styles, with the feedback from the organization saying, okay, folks, let's not so much focus on how we're going to psychoanalyze you, Bill, and change you, but more about how are we being viewed by the organization behaviorally, and what do we have to do, not only to change as individuals, but to align among ourselves that we're a unified front behaviorally. So some of this may be individual traits, but some of it may be that there's a lack of coordination of the leadership team. Case in point, how we communicate with people. Some people may be, spilling their guts and talking about stuff, and others are saying, well, we really can't talk about this. And when that's happening and you're not on the same page, the organization then says, well, what is this guy saying? And then what is this woman saying? And then now we've got a problem because they view the leadership team as something's not right here. They're lying to us. So the consistency of a team presenting itself to the organization, it being aligned with themselves, is really, really important. And that may involve having to change Bill or Dave, or it may be just adjusting behavior. But we don't have to go in deep always with the self-examination of the psychological traits. Sometimes just having the feedback behavior then gives also a rallying point or a unifying theme for the team to address, rather than saying, okay, we're taking Bill aside because he's the problem. He may be, but I'm sure there's other people on the teams that are a problem as well.
Right. So last question. So we have this data, we have this team, they acknowledge they have some work to do. How are they sharing their new intentions with the organization that just gave them this feedback? How does that work?
Well, I think that, let's start with, when you do something like this, even just give an instrument, it's an intervention into the organization, just collecting the data. Why are you doing it is the first reason. So when you start out and you give good guidance and say to people, we're collecting this data because we want to improve how we operate as an organization. We want to make it a better place to work. We want to make it more productive, however you want to explain it. You've created a set of expectations. And that expectation is that if they put in the time to collect, to participate and give you that data, they expect something different is going to occur. Now, if the leadership team is not interested in doing anything different because they don't like the results, now they got a problem. So you don't want to do this, first of all, until you've done that. Second now is that you then have to communicate back to the organization at some point from this data. Here's what we concluded in general. And that's why you don't want to pick on Bill, Dave, or anyone, because no executive I have ever dealt with, including myself, wants to be dragged across the carpet in front of everybody.
Right.
I don't think that's ever been a successful strategy. But if you portray as a team that, we need to improve how we do this, you can give that feedback. More importantly, in my opinion, then the leadership team, if it's going to say we need to do this differently, then the best way they can do it differently, let's go back to it, is behave differently. Behave in the manner that they think they need to. And that becomes, we start with behavior, we come back to behavior, because it's the same argument. This is what people experience and observe, and this is what they react to. And most employees really, I hate to say it, they don't really care what you think. They just care how you deal with them. You can think anything you want, and more often than not, most people really don't have much of a clue on what other people really think anyway.